Right, welcome back. You're still watching The Globe on the SABC News channel. The African Development Bank Group says that it will continue to push for infrastructure development as one of the effective ways of unlocking economic growth on the continent. This says Africa is battling with the economic recovery, looming food crisis and the effects of climate change. Let's now cross to our reporter in Accra, Khayelihle Khumalo, who's been there this whole week to give us a wrap of what's been happening at these annual meetings. And as always, Khayelihle, you're lighting up our screens with your wonderful Ghanaian clothing. Welcome, Akwaba.
Well, thank you so much indeed, Peter. So the markets really know me so well here. They've been really generous in terms of offering all these outfits. But of course, quite a very important day, Peter. Today is indeed the last day of this particular gathering. Just a short while ago, the African Development Bank Group President Dr. Adesina just gave his closing remarks to the members of the media. And something that was quite important in his address was around Africa, that it's ready to offer its guests to Europe. We know that once again with the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, with Europe relying at least for about 40% of guests from Russia. So saying the very good opportunities right here in the continent, saying countries like Algeria, Nigeria, Mozambique as well in Southern Africa should really just get ready, that infrastructure, to make sure that they do offer these guests to Europe, but also not to the international market for the domestic needs in the countries, but also, Peter, emphasizing the issue once again around climate change, that it is certainly killing the continent and it is reaching a catastrophic level, and it does need necessary attention from so many parties, from the private sector, from the decision makers, the government, the board of governors of the bank. They're really fully behind the initiatives that are aimed at pushing the green economy in Africa. Issues, for example, around just energy transition. So, for example, the bank once again has recommitted itself to help South Africa mobilize resources. I think that's about $47 billion so that the energy transition in terms of moving away from coal to renewable means is not really risky or affecting the country's economy nor the fiscus of South Africa.
Yeah, I saw you speaking to the finance minister a little bit earlier on. So South Africa's energy story, quite big for us, and it looks like the African Development Bank is really on board with our journey to try and assist us.
Well, very much so, Peter. So they've been very steadfast in saying that they are indispensable partner in terms of walking in this journey with South Africa to make sure that the transition is seamless, but also it's not just done abruptly. So it must be a gradual phase. It must be done in a manner that is very productive as well for South Africa's economy. So when we spoke to Minister Godongwana, he stated in no uncertain terms that by all means this is a game changer for South Africa in terms of its own economy, and it is going to be a massive challenge, especially because in some quarters right in South Africa you still do have an opposition. Others are not really buying the idea, especially because we do have some coal-fired stations that were really just erected in terms of alleviating the very energy crisis that South Africa is facing. But this is just once again another very golden opportunity for the country to be able to fix its energy. Obviously, it's going to take some time to really take shape. But also this comes, Peter, in the context of the upcoming COP27 in Egypt. Once again, it's going to be a very important task for the African countries to have a common position in terms of their expectations, in terms of the issues around the financing for adaptation. One of the very terrible irony here is that Africa is bearing the brunt of climate change. And in terms of the contribution when it comes to the gas emission, it's a least contributor. But when it comes to the far-reaching impact, it's quite really severe from where we are, not far from where we are in Accra. You have the part where in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, during this past week, there has been some flooding. In Southern Africa, we saw also in South Africa, we've also seen quite a number of very terrible cyclones, but Sarai among others. So it is indeed something that cannot be neglected or just pushed aside and cast aside, but it's something that should really be at the core in terms of planning.
All right. The governor there saying that there are opportunities for Africa, particularly when it comes to gas and other resources that are required by Europe because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. But at the same time, the same conflict has caused a number of challenges. And I think we spoke quite a bit at the beginning of this gathering about food insecurity. Did he mention that again today?
Well, once again, Peter, that has been a very dominant issue here around food security, especially because you have about 41 African economies that are terribly exposed. They rely heavily on imports. When you look at soya beans, rice, so most of their products really are coming from Russia and Ukraine, but also to all intents and purposes, with a lot of blockade that you have seen right in the Black Sea, affecting the movement of the goods and really disrupting the global supply chains. So that's really having a terrible impact in terms of the continent. But at this point in time, the bank has set aside $1.5 billion to try and cushion the impact and assist a number of African countries. So now the onus really is going to be on the member states in terms of presenting their own plans to the bank as to how they're going to spend this money. But apart from that, in terms of the farmers in the continent as well, they'll be getting a shot in the arm. So about 20 million farmers as well will be benefiting, so that Africa is not begging. And that has been a very central message from President Adesina, saying Africa cannot really be found once again in 2022 begging for food. If you have the most arable land in the world, it's quite important to make sure that you do seize the opportunity. In fact, he said Africa should be offering the solutions when it comes to food production, food packaging, and also just getting opportunity as well to exports. But also, once again, Peter, that does really boils down to the issue of the infrastructure development in the continent. As much as you do talk about lush deposits of gas, if the infrastructure is not adequate, it does become a challenge. For example, President Adesina was talking about the revival of the Trans-Sahara pipeline all the way from Algeria to Europe, and saying it's going to be a very key transit point in terms of making sure that the gas certainly does reach Europe, but also do cater for the domestic market as well.
All right, Khayelihle, perhaps one final thought about looking at this gathering over the past week. And we forget sometimes that it's actually the annual meetings of the African Development Bank. So it's not a summit in the true sense of some of the other things that we go to. But what do you think overall came out, and what was the message of the African Development Bank in general at its own annual meetings?
So by all means, Peter, quite a lot of issues really came out, but you can really feel the sense of purpose, the sense of urgency that at this particular point in time, it is a very precarious time, unprecedented amount of crises. And this particular bank, as a multilateral financial institution with a footprint almost in all regions in Africa, whether you look at East Africa, whether you look at Southern Africa, whether you look at North Africa, whether you look at the central part of the continent, West Africa. So you can really see that they do talk about a number of projects, but also you can see their seriousness in addressing the issue of development, but also making sure that they're not just focusing on certain countries, but really having a very multiple approach in terms of how they're dealing with all these issues affecting the continent. So, but also what is always important is about financing itself. So the bank has reported that they've made a bit of profit as well. I think it's about 2.5 billion US dollars. And also what is a very big challenge for the bank, Peter, is how they can use their international partners to access as well the international market, so that the footprint is not really just in the continent, but also they do get to collaborate with so many banks as well across the globe, but also having this particular bank as a dominant player in the continent. So the issues are quite daunting, but there's really a will to address them. But of course, it's always boiling down to the member states and also the private sector as well, because they also do have a stake through the private equity that are located within the bank. So it's going to be a very vital one over the past couple of months or so in terms of the realization of all the commitments, the pledges that have been made, whether you look at green economy, whether you look at areas around strengthening Africa's position in tackling decisively climate change, because that has also been a main issue that has been emphasized. Food security in the continent. Countries like Ethiopia as well, they've really just done a tremendous work in terms of making sure that they do have a surplus for their citizens when you look at the issues around wheat. So it's going to be a monumental task to sustain all of these, but making sure that they're really fulfilled so that the Africans across the continent can really see the impact.
My dear brother, thank you very, very much indeed. It's been great work that you've been doing out there. We look forward to coming to see you when you come home with all of your new wares from the local Accra market. Medasi, thank you, brother.